What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I am the best Virginian, and today I'm going to cover one of the topics that I've been wanting to cover for a very long time. Now, this doesn't have much to do with West Virginia history as much as it just has to do with history in general. Historians are infamously bad storytellers. Stick with me for a second. About a month ago, I was doing a call with some other history people, and at one point I made the comment, historians need to be storytellers, or historians need to be better storytellers. And for some reason, someone took exception to that comment. Out of the whole time we'd been talking, that was the part that someone asked me, well, what do you mean by that? So I clarified. I said, you need to incentivize people to listen to your story, to listen to what you're talking about historically. If you don't incentivize them, if you don't give them a reason to want to listen to what you're saying, they might listen to it. They're not going to retain it. They're not going to learn anything from it. When I said that, they went, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it irked me, okay? Because there's always been this division between academic history, which is history with the books and the libraries and the degrees and the classrooms. That's academic history. And oral history, which is really just mostly true storytelling. There's always been this division between these two things. I don't know why. It's always been there. It's been there my entire life. I grew up in the early 90s. If you grew up, I'd say between 1975 and 1995, you grew up at a time period where you couldn't go to the barber shop, you couldn't go down to the local diner, you could not go with your parents when they were going to get their car worked on without interacting with veterans. There were always veterans, there were always old-timers hanging around telling stories. And for anyone born after 2000, imagine being able to go somewhere, sit down, and you're going to hear World War II veterans talk about their glory days, talk about their war stories, Korea veterans, Vietnam veterans. At this point in the early 90s, a lot of guys were getting out of the military from Desert Storm, coming back, starting families, right? Think about being able to go eat a cheeseburger and being able to listen to veterans from 4 major conflicts of the 20th century sit around talking to each other. It was reality. It was a thing that regularly happened. And if they weren't talking about war stories, they were talking about their jobs, what they did for a living, railroad history, oil and gas history, coal mine history. So a lot of what I learned about local history, a lot of what I learned about these individuals came from listening to them tell stories. Fast forward, I think I was in 5th, maybe 4th grade. We started having this subject called social studies. And it was a mixture of geography and history, and I hated it. I hated it. It was a lot of filling out maps. It was a lot of filling out timelines. It was a lot of names, dates, locations, and that was it. Fast forward a few more years, and the public education system decided we are going to put a bigger emphasis on standardized testing. What does that mean? That means your history topics that had already started shifting to being more about names, dates, locations, more surface level knowledge, were now going to be not just surface level knowledge, but surface level knowledge you can boil down to multiple choice questions. Discussion went out the window. Here's the facts you need to know for the test. We are going to teach what is directly on the test. That's all we're going to cover. And we are going to cover a wide array of topics, but we're not going to get below surface level on any of them. So let's say the topic that we were studying was World War II in the Pacific. Just topic right off the top of my head. What we're going to talk about is the big events. So Pearl Harbor, a few other little things, dropping the atomic bomb. Okay, that's your two big events. The names, the dates, and the locations. That was all we covered, that was all we talked about. If you are a storyteller, what I just said should sound fairly familiar to you. Big events, names, dates, locations. If you're a storyteller, what's, whose, when's, and where's. You have 4 of the elements needed to tell a story. But in order for it to be a story, there's 6. You also need how and why. So, the way history was always taught to me in school, it was never taught as a story. It was never taught as a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and end. It was a series of semi-related facts. How do you fix this? Honestly, I don't know. And again, I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a historian. I am a storyteller. But without including the hows and the whys, you're not going to incentivize people to listen to what you're saying. I try to keep my videos fairly narratively based. They're going to have a beginning, they're going to have a middle, they're going to have an end. The how is subjective, okay? You probably like a little bit less how in your history than I do. I like getting into, if we're talking about a battle, you might be fine, it was this side versus this side won, here's the role it played in the bigger conflict. For me, I want to know about tactics on each side. I want to know what equipment was used, what weapons were used, what were the numbers looking like, what was the weather like. That's the depth of how that I like getting into. And it's probably more how than what you like in your history. And that's fine. How's subjective. I will concede the how. But the why, that's super important. Because if you want to build a historical event as a narrative by going into the why, you kind of naturally construct a narrative. What do I mean by that? Every major historical event, you have a build-up, you have the event, and you have ramifications of that event. By going into the why, you can explain what led up to that event. But there has never been a happily ever after story in history. In the history of the world, there has never been a happily ever after, nothing bad ever happened again story. Ever. It has never happened. Every single event has ramifications, has a fallout, but a lot of those events are the build-up for another event. That's how it works. You look at World War I, you look at the consequences of World War I, half of those things led into World War II. You look at the end of World War II. A lot of the events that were the fallout of World War II led us into the Cold War. Going into the why, you're naturally creating these little story arcs. You're naturally creating a narrative. That's why timelines drove me so insane in school. You have this event, and all these little things lean up in between the two. No, you have a big event, another big event, and you have the fallout from one event and the lead up to another event, and there's a lot of overlap in between the two. I don't know why there's so much pushback there. As long as it's historically accurate, as long as it pays respect to the historical events, if you're doing it in a narrative way, you're giving people more incentive to pay attention. And everyone I talk to about this, 60 to 70% of people agree with me. I explain what I mean, I explain what I'm saying. 60 to 70% of people agree with what I'm saying. They understand what I'm saying, they agree with what I'm saying. You then have the 10 to 20% of people who go, well, if it's not broke, why try and fix it? Clearly, if you look at how history is taught in the education system, yeah, it's pretty broke, but okay, fine. If it's not completely broke, why fix it? Okay. And then you have the 10 to 20%, the people involved in academic history, who defend it. Okay? They see no problem with it. They like history being taught just by focusing on big events, names, dates, locations. I think a little of it has to do with the fact that they like to be able to stand back and then if anyone diverges from that, go, well, actually, and they'll go, no, this is perfectly fine. In fact, it's the best way of teaching history. Okay. Again, I'm not a historian. I am a storyteller. Y'all have the books, y'all have the degrees, y'all have the classrooms, y'all have the auditoriums. Clearly, y'all know what you're doing. I concede, maybe I'm in the wrong here. Maybe history does not need to be taught like a narrative. Let me go into the second part of this video. For those of you who follow me on social media, I said I would get into. I had a girlfriend break up with me by hitting me with her car. She dumped me by hitting me with her car. Who? Me and the girl I was dating at the time. When? I believe it was 2014. It might have been the end of 2013. Where? Morgantown, West Virginia. Because obviously, what happened? She dumped me by hitting me with her car. A lot of y'all probably want me to go into more detail at this point, right? Why did it happen? How did it happen? But according to historians, we don't need to get into that. And according to everything we just talked about, clearly they know what they're doing. So if you want to know more about how, why, that's fine. But we're going on to another topic. We've covered the names, the dates, and the locations. We're moving on to the next topic. I'm sorry. Historians clearly know what they're doing. They clearly know that this is the better way to teach history.